The lecture today, like most of my lectures, are very interactive. It's not, yes, I'm obviously going to provide some guiding lights as to where we are on some of these issues. But more importantly, I'd like to have a two-way dialogue on some of this. The nice thing about Nigerians is that no matter the topic, whether it's politics, whether it's energy, whether it's football, we have so many experts on very many issues. And it doesn't matter what the expert is now, everybody has knowledge of this and has their own opinion. Oil, petroleum, and energy are definitely the few. Starting with the PIA. Fortunately, let me look through my own script. We have a couple of objectives on the PIA. PIA, of course, like this, about 20 years to time of fruition. We began, if you look at and that will come up the chart later. There were very many, very basic objectives why the PFA was started. First was to create efficient and effective government institutions and change what we had. Prior to that time, we had three twin pillars of organization there. You had the NNPC, of course, which was fulfilling both a commercial and quasi-regulatory function. You had the DPR, and then you had, of course, the likes of the other agencies, PPPI, PIF, and the rest of them. Then, of course, you had a very governing Ministry of Petroleum that had very, very extensive powers. So the whole idea was to create efficient and more effective government institutions. The other was to establish a framework for creation of commercially oriented and profit-driven oil companies. So in that respect, we wanted to see NNPC migrate from being a quasi-profit-directed institution to a full-time profit-directed institution. And some of those changes began to implement in 2015 when I took over as GM of NNPC. To promote transparency and good governance and accountability in institutional petroleum resources, to foster a good business environment, and obviously to deepen local content practice in Nigeria. But there were also some other objectives. One of which are not listed there, to increase government's fiscal take, but that was very, very key. We wanted to get more money out of this sector. We wanted to be able to attract a bigger volume of FDI. If you look at the statistics, you see this in terms of FDIs that flowed over the last 10 years to Africa. Nigeria had a paltry 10 to 15% of that. So something was clearly wrong for a nation that was the highest oil producing country in Africa. We wanted to stabilize the sectoral environment. So concerns about those community issues, security issues, issues of fraud-related acquisitions. We wanted to create a lot of stability around that. That there's a better structural balance. But we also wanted to address ownership and local resource issues that have crept up significantly, and so you see that dealt with in the host community provisions. Slide 2. Slide 2 just takes you to what it took for us to get a PIA. It took basically 20 years. From the time it was accepted in 2000, under the OGC 2000 policy documents. So the first draft I went to the Federal Executive Council in 2012. And then, so even the one that was then passed by the SRP-led Assembly in 2019, just as who were leaving, and was eventually rejected by the President. And the one that eventually got signed into law in 2021, it took us 20 years. Needless to say that the effect of those 20 years delay were catastrophic for the country. The projections were that the country lost upwards of anywhere between 100 to 150 billion in potential investment during that 20-year period, because investors simply didn't know what law they were going to operate on, or how long the Petroleum Act that was then prevalent was going to last. Everybody just did a hide and seek. Major oil companies didn't put in fresh funds. They just kept running the fields and tapping whatever they could. New investors couldn't come in because they weren't sure what was going on. So it was a cataclysmic deterioration of the sector because of those uncertainties. In that period, of course, a lot then happened. And so by 2021, when you had the Act, so much had happened. Nigeria's production had declined significantly. When I joined in 2015, we were going through massive security issues in the Niger Delta. And if you remember, I went around the whole of Niger Delta trying to pump up support for this, and eventually had the ceasefire agreement signed with militants to enable us to produce. But by the time we came, it was about 800,000 barrels per day. Not because that was our capacity, but because that was what we could produce because of security issues. Price of oil was at its lowest, and it was about $25 to $30 a barrel also at the time. So my immediate task at the time, in 2015, was one, get production up, get prices up. Incidentally, by some sheer coincidence, I also served at Nigeria's time as president of OPEC at the time, so it enabled me to drive the local agenda in the international scene. And one of the things that I then did was to sit down with feuding Saudi Arabia and Iran at the time, who were basically the ones holding down the pricing by virtue of flooding the market because of this agreement, to come together. And to do that, I had to go to Russia and get the Russians to join what we call the OPEC Plus concept. And in fact, the OPEC Plus concept was they gave OPEC a lot more biting force in the international petroleum arena. We then saw, therefore, after the signing of the ceasefire, production moved from 800,000 barrels to about 2 million, 1.9 and 8 to 2 million barrels. By the time we left, it was about 2.1 million barrels when I left in 2019. We also saw prices jump as soon as we got the OPEC Plus agreement in place, from an all-low $25 a barrel to then about $70 a barrel. And I think ultimately it's about $80 or $90 a barrel, transiting back again to 20. Today I think the prices are in excess of $80 a barrel. So at least in terms of the price nomenclature, we achieved what we wanted, but in terms of the volumes, unfortunately, we would rather go northwards, we started going southwards and losing volumes. In between that, of course, COVID happened, and COVID was a backbench nightmare for every country in the world and every human being in the world, and so for 2.5 years, really not much could happen, and that also affected the oil industry. We're still recovering from the post-pandemic effects because during those periods, investments were not in place. People were not exploring new territories to find oil. But worse then was that over the last 4 years, the whole COP series have compelled, and the whole global warming nightmare have compelled countries to now begin to embrace a lot more the zero carbon emission philosophy. The effect of that is therefore that people are beginning to say to themselves that the highest pollutants in this sector is oil production itself. And so they need to move in, either change whatever the product is to begin to ensure that very low methane, very low carbon is put into the atmosphere, or begin to look for alternative sources of oil. So you're looking at a time when, for a period of 20 years, we're busy debating how to pass a simple legislation. And in that period, we got hit by the three-layer effects of the pandemic itself, the reducing production itself, and then finally, transition to crisis. So today, although I think oil is beginning to come up to about 1.4, and I'm still far from where we should be, down up to 1.1 over the last 12 months. But the effect, however, is that people are even asking themselves, even if you made 3 million barrels, 4 million barrels, what's going to be the effect when everybody's running away from oil? If you followed very closely the last COP that took place in United Arab Emirates, you found the difficulty that the whole attendees had in terms of crafting a resolution at the end. And we started first with a very tough declaratory resolution that said oil should be phased out completely. And of course, the oil producers nations fought back on that, and we then went to a hybrid of okay, we'll phase it out over a period of time. And I think what we're finally landing is understanding that oil is going to be with us for the next 30-35 years in some shape or form. But hoping that we can put in place measures that will enable us to decarbonize, remove the effects in the global environment, and then hopefully be able to create a hybrid relationship between the industrialized nations who account for 95% of this pollution, and the developing countries who only account for between 3 and 5%. And so that's when we get to some of that, you see why there's been a very intense battle between African and most-developing countries against the developed world, who have somehow, by sheer happenstance of law or placement, always placed us in a position where we're doing catch-up. When we first were dealing with biofuels, and everybody was burning firewood to keep everybody going, the global world came back and said, no, that's polluting the country. The world will have to stop that, and we began to go on with the policies of forestation. So we were caught with our wood in our hands, with no energy, and we had to abandon them. So they went to coal. And once we got into the coal environment, it's too polluted. So people had to abandon coal. And so places like Enugu coal mines were all abandoned in those sort of sequences. Abandoned with still no energy. And so then we were lucky we found oil. And we thought, well, oil does it, everybody in the world wants oil. Now we're being told you have to stop producing oil because you have to go to the greener pastures of non-fossil fuels, solar, nitrogen, wind, water, and the rest of it, which are cleaner. And it was a huge debate in the last COP, even to save gas and qualify it as a transition energy, because it was both oil and gas. Now, what is the effect of all this, before I digress out of the topic itself? The effect of this is that once people move away from a product source or a product type, the financing to continue to develop that product type disappears. And so if you do not have the resources, your resources are dead on arrival. But anyway, the indices that led us to this sector largely were that before the 2021 law was passed, we had our reserve replacement ratios were very, very low. Reserve replacement relates to the rate at which you replenish what it is that you produce. So if you have 30 million barrels and you produce 5 million barrels, a good management, reserve management will be such that you're also finding new wells to place back more than 5 that you took away. Nigeria was sinking, we were not replacing our reserves. Production was extremely high in terms of cost because the oil companies had the money, most of the PSCs were very skewed in their favor, and even the little the government was getting, they were not managing accounting for well. So revenues were declining tremendously. Gas to power was extremely slow ratio. We were actually flaring most of our gas. And the job placement was very, very low because the NCDMB rules prior to NCDMB allowed oil companies to basically hire from wherever they thought they were going to have capacity. And so capacities in Nigeria were not very easily recognized. If you look at the graph, go to the next slide, it will show you the total revenue versus oil production. And you see that everything is the southwards declining curve over a period of 2012 to 2020. So you can see all that was happening in that sector, which made it absolutely imperative that PAI had to reform, had to be signed. I was particularly frustrated, I must say, in 2019 when I thought we had got the PAI to the finishing block, and then it then turned back by the presidency to make some adjustments, and so the National Assembly passed and had to begin the process anew. In the process, the PIA that was eventually passed, quite frankly, wasn't, in my view, as robust and as aggressive in timeline as the first PIA that had passed through this meeting. And now we need to look at PIA and say to ourselves, where are the gaps and what do we need to do? And there are quite a lot of areas that we're going to have to be looking at to try to fill those gaps. But in a nutshell, what the PIA did for you was basically address 4 key areas. One is optimization of what are the optimizations that were set up. We had an upstream, midstream, and one of the problems we faced was that by some sheer negligence in the past, what we found out was that government was only able to receive royalties under the structures that were set up in various percentages. But when oil price shot from $25 a barrel to about $100 a barrel, there was no provision to capture the excess profit. And so the oil companies basically continued on the same sequencing of royalty payments. And one of the things that we took successfully for when I was there was to change that law so that what you call now royalty by price, which is the second segment of fiscal earning, then was passed in 2018. And that was incorporated into the PIB. What that says is that when your prices in the international markets are above a certain level, above $50 for example, or within $0 to $50, we use the existing royalty regimes. When it is $50 to $100, we use the existing royalty regime plus an additional 5%. When it is above 150, we use the existing plus 10%. And between those, you do what you call linear interpolation to determine really what numbers you should use. It enabled us to capture increases in pricing in the international market where we were not having those advantages before. So fiscal area was key. A new ministerial rule was also placed with PIA. I remember people saying to me that why was I fighting so hard to reduce the powers of the minister under the Petroleum Act when I'm the minister? Well, my answer usually was that you're not going to be the minister forever, and that's the reality. So you've got to look at the institution, not at the position. And so my point was that the powers that were given to the minister previously, the power to regulate pricing, power to grant all the approvals in terms of blocking bridges, power to basically sub-adjudicate on matters of dispute between the states, was just too wide. And even with the big size DPR supporting them, it still was a problem. That explains probably one of the gaps, some of the gaps that you see why we've not been able to achieve the levels. Because it became so politicized, one person had so much authority, and it was the be all and end all in the sector. I guess because I've been in the private sector, knowing that we suffer that, I came in with a mind to try and stop that. And so I did push that the powers of the minister should be called. The powers of the minister today are very minimal. A lot more authority has been given to the Upstream Commission, Upstream Authority, and a lot more powers have been given to the Downstream Midstream Commission. However, the need to trim the minister's power has went too far to the point where he's not on the board of NNPC, which I totally support. He's not on the board of the Upstream Commission, which I don't support. And he's not on the board of the Midstream Commission, which I also don't support. I think that he has to have a foot somewhere to be able to run regulation, and regulatory agencies must work with him without removing the power of privacy that they will have. So those are some of the areas I think as we begin to look at amendments to this law, we'll be looking at. And there are silence in terms of other regulatory agencies, or quasi agencies like PTDF and NCDMB. Again, we need to incorporate their law back into the PIB to the courts in terms of how they are managed. Of course, we set up new licensing regimes. The previous OMLs, OPLs, and OELs were replaced by petroleum exploration licenses, petroleum prospecting licenses, and petroleum mining licenses with various terms, 2 years, 6 years, and 20 years. There was an 18 months conversion, obviously time frame in which we need to convert the old licenses to the new ones. Who were the biggest winners and the biggest losers under the PAI amendment scheme? I always do ask that question. I think the first question must have been, in terms of biggest losers, that it would have been the minister, but he seems to have lost already. Having said that, the question is, and I've been asked the question, should the president be the minister of petroleum? And I've always said that is not right. As much as we can, we should endeavor to keep those portfolios different. President is all-time equal. He has the total power in the presidential system of government. He doesn't need to answer another title to it. But the Minister of Petroleum should be given the right to do his work and do his work full-time. And that's still my position. That was my position then, that's still my position now. Because if you don't, then the whole idea of the powers stripped out of the Minister of Petroleum will come right back. Because those powers were stripped out of the minister, but they were not certainly stripped out of the president. So if you take it out of the minister and the president becomes the minister, then most of those powers come right back to where they were before. So powers of approvals, that's basically what you're going to see happen. I'd love to see that separated so that the president can then be the last adjudicator on issues of authorities exercised by the petroleum minister, whether it was done according to the law or whether it was done right. So he definitely is, that position lost quite a bit in terms of authority, and I don't want to ascribe the powers of the president to that position, so I take it the way it's true, because right now they're represented by ministers of state like I was too. The difficulty with ministers of state portfolio usually is that it doesn't matter how brilliant you are, it doesn't matter how much you want to drive the sector, you lack the authority. And what tends to happen invariably is that even your subordinates, whether they be from NNPC or whether they be from the regulatory agencies, will soon find that because you don't have the authority, it is better to go to the president. And so you find a complete confusion in the management of the industry and the energy sector, which shouldn't be. So that's one of the reasons why I think it's also going to be something litigated at some point, whether it's legal for you to do that under the PIA rules, because PIA did not certainly foresee a president being a minister. So those are some of the issues. In terms of incentives, I think the oil companies ended up slightly more in terms of they got a little bit more incentive, but it was only about 4 to 5 percentage factor. But that was quickly robbed by the panoply of other fees that were imposed. The education fee is still there, the withholding tax is still there, but more important, a lot of the agencies are now going to the assembly seeking powers to be able to impose additional fees. So the net effect of what was intended to be a bit more incentive for them to put in investment has not yielded those investments. So the question is whether you're going to see some of the big ticket investment items come back to Nigeria. We're also doing it at a time where there's a lot of competition between Nigeria and a lot of developing countries who are suddenly finding oil. And so once our brown fields have matured and are predictable in terms of their production, and also predictable in terms of the fiscal leveraging, the green fields have a lot of latitude to give incentives. And so an oil company that has 20 billion to invest looks at Nigeria and looks at, say, Kenya, or looks at, say, Congo, and sees some of the benefits that are given. And you simply take the money there because the returns are going to be more. Now, the example, we're just going to hand over the whole thing and compete with green fuel donors. No. But we can at least take the benefit of the fact that our fuels are mature and are predictable, while the others are still not predictable. And we're trying to make sure that we're up the incentive schemes that are available. In business, I used to, when I ran my own private business, I used to remember the phraseology of a professor who said to me that I'd rather get 1% of 100% than 0%. I mean, I'd rather get 1% of 100% than 100% of 0. You know, so it's important that as we look at how much we need to call, we have to look at volumes. We have to ask the question, why volumes decline? Volumes, we will say security, we will say regulation, we will say uncertainty, we will say corruption. But volumes are declining because the people who are putting in the funds are still not seeing enough incentives, and they are competing with very, very tight funds. And that's why those are disappearing. When they disappear, the fields are not able to grow, but they don't have the investments that they need. And unfortunately, we haven't saved enough to have a pool of funds like Saudi Arabia, where you can actually propel your own growth with your own resources. That's why we are having a declining crop. Yes, of course, issues of security and the rest also apply, but funding is key. If you look at the entire investment over the last 10 years, like I said, Nigeria's attraction of foreign investment in this sector is very, very poor. It's worsened by the fact that over the last 5-6 years, oil companies are actually beginning to sell off blocks, wanting to exit to new layer. So that's something we may need to address with time. I think I'm going to flip. The only comment I made in terms of the structures, of course, NNPC, I'm very glad that finally the PAI is compelling government to look at the privatization, or sorry, the private, establishing NNPC as a private company. Private company is different from going private. I'm still seeing post-PIA still a lot of governmental interference in NNPC operations. I like to see that all over away. But to do that, you've got to take a very clean break. You've got to look at the assets and liabilities of NNPC, address the liabilities. Government needs to take over its assets properly and let NNPC run its structures professionally. I'll leave that and I'll run quickly to so the prices I'm seeing out there are not reflective of the movements in petroleum. Secondly, a lot of people who enjoy petroleum subsidy, quite frankly, are likely the rich. Anybody who can buy a car for 4 to 5 or 6 million becomes a rich man. And so you can't do that until you can buy your fuel. But I think you can have models to deal with transportation. Some of the 60% of our transport users use diesel, so they're not even in your PMS. But those who use PMS, to be honest, you can also find structures of a shortened regime. I think that whilst I support what government did, I think it was absolutely inevitable, otherwise it would have been broke. I think there are certain things that ought to be put in place. One, the money needs to be dedicated to refineries, get the refineries back on track. Two, it needs to be dedicated to very critical sectors, health, education, so you can prepare your populace. Three, it needs to be dedicated to a special funding account for investment so they can cover the gap. And four, you need to begin to put money into driving their numbers so you can increase your production. Those things have to be done for subsidy over time to be, subsidy removal to be as painless as possible. If you go to the next 2 pages, it gives you the pros and cons of subsidy, yes, of subsidy. Now, let me just spend 5 minutes, as I said, I'm running out of time. Running out of time very seriously, unfortunately. But let's look at the future. Where do we go with this? Transition energy has become a critical issue. The world is moving at a very, very rapid pace towards the energy. But one of the exciting things is that Africa, by some sheer happenstance, continues to be blessed by these resources. Whether it is solar, whether it is wind, whether it is water, whether it is nitrogen or hydrogen, we're beginning to find that the last resources availability are lying in Africa. Over the next 50 years, the world is actually going to go into a scramble. It's already started for Africa. The second scramble for Africa, first was slave trade and all that, but the next scramble is coming. And it's going to come on the back of resources. Because all those resources are here. All the resources are here. But Africa is not still developing those resources. People are coming in, taking them in their own nature, taking them out to produce elsewhere and provide electricity. So we need to begin to have a holistically regulated minerals industry, not just petroleum. Petroleum is a commodity. There's too much focus on it. I'd like to see a day when, quite frankly, every regional space will be given the opportunity to develop their own resources and pay huge tax to the government. And so we are forced to process, and there are rules in terms of how you propel those sectors. If you have oil, you must process and look at the regularized fine market all over Africa. If you have minerals, you have to process and sell it for commodities. So look at what happened in Niger after the coup happened. Have you seen the price of uranium? You know, they were selling for really, France was speaking for pittance. Now they're getting about 5,000 times the price that it was before. And suddenly Niger is moving up in terms of the GDP. So we need to take very dramatic steps. The future is not about just abandoning oil, and we call it the transition just to stability. The future is about recognizing that we have oil resources, moving quickly from the raw nature of our oil resources to the refined, decarbonized nature of our refined resources, to local African integrated markets where you can sell this product, begin to protect those markets, while at the same time paying huge attention. Let's not put all our attention to petroleum and forget that the world is moving and we have what they need behind our backyard. If we focus almost on what is daily bread, the oil that we drill, the monies that we get quickly, and forget to deal with uranium, the other minerals out there, by the time we turn our attention to that, we'll still be in the same position as we find ourselves in oil. Because very soon again they will move, and nothing will have come out of it. So we need to protect Africa, we need to protect Nigeria, we need to continue to develop our resources, but we need to develop our petroleum resources in such a manner that it realizes that in 20, 30, maybe 35 years, the scramble for oil will begin to cease. We have that window within which to do all that we can to refine all our oil, capture our market, get the best fiscal returns from those. But we need to begin to develop and capture the resources in the mineral areas. I think that if we make the same mistake we made in petroleum, in terms of the federal government overhang over these resources, we're going to destroy it again. We need to sit back and let regions, basically, regions like a collection of states, have the same propensity, whether it's based on the 7 or 6 geopolitical zone structure, to develop them, put the rules, regulate, put the tax relationship concept, so that everybody finds how to pay attention. You know, if you did that, people will be focusing on minerals, and some people will be focusing on oil. Right now, the whole nation is focused on oil. And I'm not sure we're focused on oil and focused on it right now. With that, I will stop. I wish I could have more time. I hope that when I do come back again, we'll have 2 to 3 hours. This is something we teach at Harvard for a 1-week period, so I'm trying to deliver it in 45 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It used to be in the villages that when maidens are dancing, that the lady that has more spectators is the better dancer. You won't believe we have about 100 people joining us online. I love that. Please, I also want to acknowledge the presence of, boy, we got 3 deans with us. Dean of Multidisciplinary Studies is here with us, Prof. Thank you, sir. We also have the Dean of Law, Professor Simisola Akintola. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us. The ladies always bring out the colors. Thank you. The Dean of Tech is here, Professor Isaac Bangoye. Is he around? Thank you, sir. Thank you for joining us. I'm glad to see you. We also have a lot of professors. Professor Sunday Shema is here. Can you wave to us? Thank you, sir, for coming. Professor Demola Aremu is also here. Please, I hope I'm not the one keeping you standing. You will sit just 1 minute and then we'll let you leave. And I think Professor Bute is here. Thank you, sir. And so many other professors. Please, because of his time, I'll just call Professor Adara Lebe to just take one question before our teacher goes.
Thank you so much, Madam Obito, for this opportunity. And ladies and gentlemen, I think we've had a wonderful time. I first came across Professor Kachikwu when I was into my 20s, 1988. He had come to Nigeria Law School as the guest now to talk to us, and I was mesmerized for the entire period that he spoke. And I see the man mesmerized and very, very excited each time I listen to him, like I have this afternoon. I'm sure we've enjoyed listening to him. Unfortunately, as I informed us, he has a meeting in Abuja at 2 o'clock, he has 1 o'clock flight to catch, and he has to really be on the phone. I would have loved to say one more to engage us with questions and answers, but that will not be possible. So we have just an opportunity to take one question or two. And I see my great dean, Professor Akintola, raise her hand. I yield to you, madam.
I'd like to extend some courtesies to Professor Ibe Kachikwu. You may not remember, he was my contract teacher at the Obafemi Awolowo Universities in the early 80s. He was a fastidious guest there, and he still, as a now.
You, sir, in your discussion, you talked about how it is important for us to really develop our natural resources, especially the oil. And all over the world, we know that natural gas is transition fuel. And a few days ago, we saw how the NPC signed an agreement, an MOU, with Wilson Industries of China on development of FLNGs for utilization and commercialization of our natural gas. Now, we see that this agreement is hinged on flare gas. What is the federal government doing, sir, to try to increase the level of gas? Because now we know gas is a problem, especially for the energy, and for future energy projects there has to be upstream development. What is the energy doing in terms of increasing the volume of natural gas available for future energy projects in Nigeria? Thank you, sir.
I'm told that we have a few other questions. Unfortunately, we will be able to take those questions, but I promise you, I'll send those questions and I'll get Professor Kachikwu to report at a convenient time.
Thank you very much. My colleague, my younger colleague, esteemed Professor Dean of Law. Yes, I hear what you say in terms of uranium, not just uranium, hydrogen, quite a few. And what are we going to do to ensure that we capture them? The first is what we're doing mistakes in oil. One of the big mistakes in oil is lack of resource control, whether we like it or not. Once you don't have people who are entitled by virtue of heredity have a good say on how the resources develop, what you're going to have, that injustice to continue to plague you. I don't want that injustice to plague Sambisi Forest and the rest of those items. So So the first thing you have to do is to ensure that you have a common national resource control model that enables people who have resources to be able to reap some of the benefits of that. When you do that, they become the natural protectors of that resource. They become the people in the forefront of the development of that resource. And it doesn't give the federal government too much money in its hands, you know, to subject some of the sort of allegations that you see. I tell you, being on desks such as Petroleum is a very, very tough desk, because the amount of pressures that you have to do the things that are not right are immense. And it takes a huge amount of willpower. Sometimes I don't give myself those praises. I think I give praises more to the way my father brought me up and the fact that I worked in the private sector for so long, and they were very fundamental rules that just couldn't be breached. Otherwise, I'm not necessarily better than the worst culprits. So I made it very clear that that was still an issue to look into. Second is that if you appoint people who have succeeded in their various fields of state, they focus on money, reduces tremendously. So we need to allow resource control mechanisms to be developed a bit more. We need to look at capital. The problem with oil and high developed in Africa is that all the money came from foreign investors, and foreign investors have a different field, basically the West. We need to begin to look at Asia. We need to begin to look at Arab countries. We need to begin to look at private capital in Nigeria. We need to begin to look at government savings to propel the growth and development of some of these resources. And that's why I said that if attention is given to these resources by those who are closest to those resources, with very clear rules in terms of what the federal government will be entitled to, it will save some of the anarchy that you saw happening in the petroleum sector. Finally, we need to have a conscious effort about training. Transition energy is just beginning. This is the time to train experts. This is the time to give out scholarships to those fields. This is the time to reward educational institutions who are centers of excellence in some of these areas. When you see cracking or fracking that happened in the US, it took 15, 18 years of conscious development of skill and technology in those sectors. And were provided by places like MIT, Harvard, a couple of those, and funds were given to them for that purpose. So I think the big disconnect in our society is that our educational establishments are not allowed to play the role that they ought to play because funding is not there. If you tell the University of Ibadan Energy Group now to sit down and tell us what policies we must pursue to make tapping uranium possible and better, you get good results. These are not people who are playing in the field. They're just going to look at what international models and develop a local model along those lines. So educational institutions have a key intellectual role to play in policy formulation and indeed an active participation. Harvard over 50 years ago went into being able to get into some of these businesses. Some of the businesses that Harvard run are listed in the stock exchange. And so as an institution, they own businesses and confront themselves, not to talk about they raise over 3 to 8 billion every year on alumni funding. So there are various models. It's a systemic change in our system. Even for the universities that have relied solely on government funding, it has to change. We have to have private sector infusion and centers of excellence infusion, so that Ibadan is known for something, Nsukka is known for something, Lagos is known for something, and we tap those intellectual talent to grow this. So I think there's a wide spectrum of things that we can do to achieve this. There was a question on gas. Yes, I like what NNPC did in terms of the contract they just signed with China. In 2016, we had a 70 billion commitment by China to invest in the oil sector, with the team that I led. Of course, that was eventually turned down. The greatest problem I've seen with foreign capital embrace is that there's a lot of emotive arguments in Nigeria about not selling your rights as an owner. In the process, we lose ability to attract the right capital, attract the right technology, and attract the right skills. And we somehow have to get ourselves away from this very unholy embrace that's really let us move through and open up the environment to very firm regulations to people who are ready to put money into some of these sectors. Yes, PAI created incentives for gas. You give a discount, so you had a 3% royalty payment as opposed to 5% of the bill. You had a gas fund that was being created. But that's not enough. We have very short time to develop gas. We had a very long time to develop oil because we wasted gas for a very long time. So one of the things I did when I was there was I did what they call the gas acceleration project, which forces companies to take smaller companies, go into big entities and pick up the gas and go and process it. But oil companies were focusing on oil and not the gas. We need to, I like the fact that the Minister for Gas was appointed. I'm not too sure that splitting petroleum between gas and petroleum necessarily yields much of the result. But I think you need to have a team whose main focus is gas. Now, all the gas assets under the PAI were inherited by NNPC. Again, we're going back to the same old. We ought to be able to have a gas company who manages all the gas resources of this country, whose main goal is how to drive gas to this optimum between now and the next 10 years. There's absolutely no reason why we should have 1 second of darkness in a country where we have so much gas waiting. So resources are needed, structure is needed, proper legislation is needed for us to be able to achieve those important incentives. Luckily, gas is accepted as transition energy. At least for now, I don't know how long that's going to go for. But what it is that you can get funding for the development of gas. You can't get funding right now for the development of oil resources. So we do need to begin to look at how to tailor our policies in a manner that fits what is happening in the global environment. Thank you.